Christianity wants to wear a costume that it thinks everyone will like. It doesn't want to be enemies with anybody, and it wants to have this attitude that people know intrinsically is the appropriate attitude, which is total tolerance, no judgment, and allowing people to be, right? Any human being that's raised to value other human beings will innately know a lot of these general principles by just being around people who emulate it, and you pick that stuff up. And so there becomes a problem when you subscribe to a religion which requires specific types of thinking processes and considering the world in specific ways. Meaning, an open marriage relationship where people have all the sexual partners they want. Any Christian would say that's inappropriate and not okay. That's sinful behavior. And so right there is intolerance, right there. Right there is judgment. Right there is all the qualities that they don't want to be adorning themselves with. Honestly, because they're very loving people. But they don't realize, this is the blind spot, that the self-righteous belief that they carry, that they're right, forces a psychological approach to the world which demands intolerance, because the religion says you have to believe in this way. And so it becomes, a person then begins to realize that they're not being honest with themselves. This is what really begins to happen. As a person ages, and as a person goes through more and more life and more suffering, and develops more and more compassion and more awareness and identity with themselves and others, they begin to realize that this approach to life doesn't work. Anyone who's a conscious being, any person who's really analyzing and looking at their behavior and considering what they subscribe to and all that. Because when a person doesn't do that, that's when this whole pathology thing begins to emerge, which is what happened culturally when Constantine basically made Christianity, organized Christianity with those 300 bishops, Catholic bishops, and then pushed it, 75 years later with Theodosius, pushed it into the culture. And this is exactly the picture of what the Christian does. They push their psychology, their opinions, their finality, their final conclusions in life onto others, adorning it with this idea of grace, tolerance, and unconditional love. And it's a completely double message. Because it isn't intolerant, it is conditional, and it isn't grace. Because grace, to me, there's not even a reminder of what was done. There's not even a brought to awareness the grace that's being bestowed. That's it. That's like a pure, translucent grace. Like when Campbell said, these symbols have to be transparent. They have to open. They have to be transparent to transcendence. So a transparent grace would be a grace that you never even knew had hit you, had even been given to you. You'd never even know it. It's like giving people money and you never tell them that you gave it to them. You never even give them a clue. You just drop the money in the envelope, put it in their mailbox, and just watch from afar and see what happens. And when they ask you about it, you act completely dumb. This is being transparent to transcendence, because that person, when they receive that gift of money, when they don't know who it's from, They can't owe anybody anything. And they have to accept the gift. This would be the cross in a symbol of that's transparent to transcendence. This would be that word picture where you're not having to see this man tortured for you, where you're not having to remember that he got what you should have got. That's not being transparent to transcendence. That's putting in klesha, debris between the spiritual epiphany awaiting you and where you're at that point. And so when you put this onus on it, the sin as your base point of life, when you do that, you disrupt this whole maturing, this whole development of the spiritual intellect of the individual, the spiritual potential to become. The inner guiding force that brings a person into becoming, into illumination, right? And so by putting historical record into the symbols, you're not keeping it transparent to transcendence. The church came in and it took the transcendent symbols that were already there, that had already been a part of man long before the church was there, and it concretized them. And it brought them into a tangible awareness rather than a transcendent awareness. And it forced them into time, place, and event and character. And this disrupts, it makes it not transparent to transcendence, because you think about this man dying for you rather than seeing God in all of nature with nothing fallen, seeing God within yourself, your composition within yourself without any kind of dirtiness there. The dirt creates this, it ruins the translucency to the heart. And that's the church came in, and that's why I said it's a pickpocket. They've come in and they have removed this transparency and made you pay for it by saying you're a sinner. And you've got to accept this gift of grace in order to be able to know yourself and to know God, to know, awareness and all this stuff. And you'll never be able to know because you're caught up in the klesha. You're caught up in the debris, the sin debris. And that's why I say it doesn't matter if you think yourself is forgiven and there is no such thing as sin, or you're completely absolved of sin or anything like that. It doesn't matter. That's why the Christian thinks of themselves when they die. That will be the only time when they truly know God, because they're in this material body. They're in this dirty thing, which keeps them from God. And they don't realize that they are composed of God, which is what everything is composed of in the entire universe, which is why Alan Watts would say, when you look up at the sky and see the stars, you someday will say, look, that's me. That's what he means by that, in a very real sense, because all of it is one. That's why this idea of separation is crazy. You see how all these principles I keep talking about, they all coalesce this same principle, which is knowing yourself, living in faith, living in spontaneity, not having any klesha or debris, no such thing as sin, shouldn't be any guilt or anything like that. Consequence is the result of your own decisions, therefore you create your own reality. All of these things are all constellating self-responsibility, self-awareness, selfhood, becoming into awareness of yourself and the environment, and behaving and acting appropriately within the environment. This is basic human nature. This is basic becoming an adult, becoming into a self-responsible person. That's why all of this all constellates that stuff. And that's why when you put a religion in that whole matrix, in that whole amalgamation, you have put chaos into that situation because you have removed the ability for the heart to navigate this person through that process by calling the heart dirty. That's why it's such a big deal. That's why it's so complicated. That's why it's so hard to get into the space I'm talking about and pointing to. That's why. Because this religion has poisoned the entire psychological, metaphysical development of the individual. It has put a poison into that. And the religion, quote unquote, claims to have given you the antidote, but the antidote doesn't work because the poison doesn't respond. The psyche doesn't respond to the antidote being provided. Because no matter how much guilt and how much grace you feel, you're still in that cycle of either feeling grace or feeling guilt. You're still in the cycle. And so the antidote called grace that you've been given doesn't resolve anything. Because the person isn't truly clean and one with God until they're dead. And so that's why it's so important psychologically to begin to be able to see this stuff. Because seeing your own self and your own dysfunction and your own pathology and your own dependence and your own beliefs and how it's keeping you from faith, seeing it is what is required. That's the antidote. The antidote is awareness, not grace. The antidote is awareness. The antidote is knowing yourself and faith. That's what the antidote is. The antidote for life, to begin to be able to coalesce with it and not be hostile towards it and think it needs to be corrected or endured. So that the fire that the Buddha called all of life can be quenched. That's self-identity. That's the process. That's the necessary antidote for all the klesha, all the debris, all the maya, so that satori, awakening, and there it is. And when you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you see it, you can't describe it, you can only point to it. And everyone else has to find it. That's the idea that Campbell was saying. You have to follow your own path or you're not on the adventure.